This podcast is sponsored by Bigger Brains, online training that won't bore you to tears. Expand the minds of your workforce at getbiggerbrains.com.
Welcome to Permission to Speak, the video blog and podcast that loiters at the intersection of leaders who want their people to speak up, technology that facilitates connections, and results that serve our higher purpose. Now, here's your host, Kelly Vandever.
Hello, welcome to the podcast. My name is Kelly Vandever, and our special guest today is Lauren Maxwell. Yay!
Hi.
Trained as an opera singer, Lauren learned early on that she could make an impact by telling other people's stories. Now she uses those storytelling skills in the business world. Lauren is currently a storyteller and communication strategist at IBM for social cloud deployment and adoption. She also served in a similar role, also at IBM, as the resident storyteller for social business transformation as IBM focused on enhancing their culture of participation. Before joining IBM, Lauren was an associate account executive, community manager, and marketing strategist for Prosper Public Relations, and she served as the coordinator of external communications for the South Carolina Governor's School of Arts and Humanities. I do want to point out that during the course of our interview, Lauren's views, of course, will be her own and don't necessarily reflect IBM's positions, strategies, or opinions. So welcome, Lauren. So glad to have you.
Thank you. So happy to be here.
Excellent. Now, one of the things we do is we start out by asking a couple of quirky questions of our guests so we get to know them a little as a person. And so I'll go ahead and start with those questions and then we'll get into the deeper content stuff, okay?
Awesome.
Excellent. So the first question, what is your favorite possession?
Yes. Well, this one didn't take me long to come up with an answer for, even though it's kind of strange to talk about him as a possession. He's more of a family member, but my dog, Herbie, one of my, well, he's more like a child than a pet, I think. He and I are, really close. He's my little furry sidekick. I work often from home, so he keeps me company. Sometimes tries to participate in meetings, which I discourage. He is contained at the moment because he really enjoys the spotlight. He's very active, very communicative, likes to hold hands, likes to play. So he isn't here today, but yeah, Herbie is a good one to get to know. If you are involved with me on social media at all, that's probably not a surprise.
And so tell everybody what kind of dog Herbie is.
Yeah, he's a little silky terrier. So he looks kind of like a Yorkie, but a little bit bigger than that. I found him at a shelter in Baltimore, Maryland. So we've had a great time together over the past few years. And he's a little bit of a hero, actually, in my current community, because last year I had a fire at my house. And he was the one who saw the fire and alerted my husband and I to the fire and got us out of there and probably saved a couple of nearby houses. So,
no way. Oh my
yeah,
gosh.
So he got a few extra treats for that.
What a good boy. What a good boy.
Yeah.
Wow. Excellent. Okay, cool. So our second quirky question, tell us something surprising about yourself that most people don't know.
Well, I think that a lot of people, especially in my professional life, probably don't know that I'm very involved in yoga. I really love practicing yoga regularly. I try to make it as often as I can, usually 4 times a week or so. I like to do hot yoga when I can because there's a power element that makes me stronger, and it's actually been useful in my professional life as well because it helps me stay grounded. And, after a busy day, it can just help you be really still and kind of reflect on what's going on and refocus. And it helps you kind of, balance things in chaotic moments, because sometimes when you're trying to practice yoga and doing something that feels impossible, you have to find a way to make it happen. And that can help remove stress from your everyday life as well.
Interesting. So hot yoga, I've heard of it, but I don't really know what it is. So.
Yeah, it's just kind of, often it's a power vinyasa flow in a heated room. So it helps you stretch a little more deeply, and the power element helps you build strength, and particularly in your core, which is a popular, I think, term in the exercise world. But sometimes, you want to get out of there because it's really hot and challenging. But like I said, it helps you learn how to cope with stressful moments in your real life.
Okay. Okay. And I guess because it's hot, that's why the muscles can bend or stretch more,
Yeah,
just like a
yeah. It
hot
helps
pack or
you,
something. Yeah. Okay.
right. It helps you gain some flexibility.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Very cool. Well,
Yeah.
I may have to try that. I don't know.
You should. You should.
All right. Well, cool. Well, now let's transition into a little deeper question, if you will. So, what's your story? What happened in your life that got you to a place where you cared about employees, that they had an ability, a voice to speak up?
Yeah, well, I think my answer here goes back to the background in opera that you mentioned earlier. Um, I spent about 10 years or so studying opera and pursuing that as my career before I decided to shift my path. And being around so many creative people and so many artists, in when I did my undergraduate work, when I did my graduate work, and beyond, just really helped me value people having individual voices and thoughts. And creativity in those arenas is really viewed as your greatest asset. So when I started to think about how I could make an impact on sort of the greater world and not this little tiny niche that is classical music and opera, I really saw a bridge there of how people in an organization could be empowered to voice their creative thoughts and take a seat at the table instead of assuming that those ideas aren't welcomed.
So, how did that first start manifesting, in the business world for you?
Well, it was sort of the rise of social media and social tools in marketing. And I had identified communication as my strength because I had always been a reader and a writer, and whatever job I had, communication always sort of rose to the forefront. So around that time, I noticed that a lot of businesses needed to use social media but didn't really understand how. So I sort of used that and became a self-taught marketer using Google and the internet to, search whatever problem I needed to solve and kind of train myself how to take action. So I figured out how to communicate in that way and was able to help clients do that. And then I reached a point where I was like, well, I'd kind of like to take this to the next level. And I started thinking about how social collaboration could make such a big impact inside an organization. And that's what led me to IBM and their social business initiatives. And it can be confusing when I tell people what I do now because they hear social business, and if they don't have experience with an enterprise or a larger company or any kind of business social platforms, they might think of Twitter and LinkedIn, and all those things are great. But I really like the culture change and the concept of getting the processes and the tools out of the way and letting the ideas and the innovation kind of rise to the surface.
Well, and that's when I first ran across you somewhere in that mix,
Yeah.
as I was looking at reading some of the things that IBM is doing, and just seeing how they had really made a shift in their culture to be more open. And I read Ed Brill's book, who I know is he still your boss, or he was?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And so I was seeing all that, and I found it fascinating.
Yeah.
And then somebody connected us, and I saw the storyteller aspect of what you do, and I was like, I want to know this lady.
Yeah.
So I had a background helping people with business presentations, and I saw the value of stories in that. And you were telling me that you were collecting stories about using social tools to better business results. So, do you have a few stories that you can maybe share with us about some of the things you learned there?
Yeah, I do. And I know I've told you this before, but I was able to spend some time sort of digging for those stories and figuring out how to package and amplify them internally. A lot of that has been internal because, with over 400,000 employees, there are plenty of channels to share those with IBMers. A couple have made their way to external events and an external IBM social business blog. But we have some really good examples. The social business adoption team that I was working with formerly, and actually still work with as part of our kind of expanded mission with the social cloud deployment. They identified sort of 5 areas where at IBM we've really seen results following social business collaboration practices. Those are innovation, speed and agility, efficiency, employee engagement, and client experience. So we've found stories for each of those. I actually developed an internal ebook that had sort of a prime example for each category, which was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And one example is our supply chain. So they have very social leadership. There's a VP who just loves to kind of be transparent, work in the open, engage her employees, and they developed something on our internal collaboration platform, Connections, called the Proposal Center of Competence. And there they helped with proposal development. They logged blogs. They logged over 600 hours of active collaboration. And this is across time zones, across geographies, just really connecting IBMers around the world who otherwise might find it hard to work quickly and really engage in conversation without this channel. They said that their emphasis, which I loved, was reverse mentoring and flattening the organization. So that goes back to the idea that anyone can have a seat at the table, and you don't have to have a certain position or a certain level of clout to voice your opinion or bring an idea forth. So the cool thing was, after they did this and developed this Center of Competence, they saw a 10% increase in wins. So that's a measurable outcome that is really cool and goes straight to the bottom line. So that's important when we're telling our story, that we focus on those outcomes. And I think it's also important in terms of adoption to think about the outcome first and have that clarity in mind so that you can develop a path to get there.
So when they established this channel, that was that part of their goal, was they wanted to increase the percent of wins?
Absolutely. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And there are a few other great examples. Oh, one that I really like is in 2014, IBM became the first company to surpass 7,000 patents in 1 year. That's a lot of patents. So a cool thing was also in 2014, we got the results of a 2-year study of collaboration projects inside IBM. And it turned out that our inventors who worked socially and worked out in the open and shared their knowledge actually demonstrated 120% to be 120% more likely to drive measurable innovation. So those are the people filing those patents.
Wow.
A correlation, not causation, but a pretty cool thing to note. And, you know, who knows how exactly they did that, but they could be tapping into the expertise of their colleagues to solve problems or move projects forward. They could be using social channels to just get the work done more quickly and efficiently. But I think that sharing expertise thing is key. And that's actually a key practice related to our IBM values that we celebrate inside the company, which I appreciate, is, you know, together, we've all got these little individual pockets of expertise. If we put them together, imagine what we can do. And so social platforms really help people connect those dots.
Very cool. Very cool. Those are great stories. I always love it when there's some science or some support behind something that I just believe must be true.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, as you are as you're working with pulling together all these stories, creating this ebook, were there any, you mentioned a list of things that you have as values, as kind of goals in the organization, but were there any particular trends or commonalities that you noticed with some of these successes, maybe that were missing from some of the other things you noticed?
I think so. Yeah. You know, I think you and I might have discussed this before, but it's important to kind of let employees know that it's okay to make a mistake, because that could be one hesitation that people have when it comes to working socially, sort of admitting on a public forum that they don't know something or that they need to get additional help, they need to get more answers. So kind of making that okay in the organization has been very valuable, where we've seen success. And I think another thing is that, like I said before, keeping those outcomes in mind first. And this is interestingly also a key component of adopting agile methodologies. Another sort of key focus area inside IBM right now is to begin with the outcome in mind. And I think that applies to social, and is a trend I've noticed. Another thing is that top-down leadership. So your leader sort of modeling that this behavior is great and encouraged and okay, and put those ideas forth, help solve problems. And another important piece related to success is enablement. So that's something that our adoption team that I work closely with has been very involved in, is developing materials to help people who have these old ingrained habits, old ways of working, adopt new ones and think outside the box and try something new in their workflow. And that can feel like an uphill battle, but if you show them the benefits, which is the power of the storytelling approach, then maybe they're more likely to try it. And another practical way to do that is to, give them how-tos related to their job roles or their particular organization.
So can we go into a little more depth on that? So you mentioned mistakes as being people being okay with admitting on a public forum that they don't know something or they're not sure how to do something. So how does that look inside of IBM? How have people gotten comfortable with that vulnerability, if you will?
Yeah, I think my current project, that expanded mission, is a good example. We're working on the internal deployment and adoption of IBM Verse, which is a kind of, if you've looked around on Twitter, you might have seen it. It's, hashtag new way to work. We've talked a lot about it at IBM this past year. So my team is actually delivering it to every IBMer. And it's exciting because it's meant to be, not just an inbox, but a way of working. It's a collaboration environment brought into your email. It sort of does some of the thinking for you so that you can get work done. It shows you your most important contacts. It handles your calendar. And getting that to IBMers and moving all of their mail to the cloud to make that happen is, as you can imagine, for such a big company, a challenge. And, we're trying to do it in a year. We're trying to move fast, fail quickly, correct the course if we need to, and then make the experience as positive as we can for our users, which are IBMers. So this has been a really fun and exciting project to be part of, but that vulnerability has definitely come into play because, at moments where we've had to adjust or back up sort of pause the rollout for a week to figure something out, we've tried to be very open and transparent with IBMers about that. And we've used a community and a blog to do that. And we've tried to engage them and provide those answers through social channels. And I've found that it just takes a lot of misunderstanding and frustration out of the equation, because when IBMers come and say, wait, why don't I have Verse yet? Or when can I have it? We're able to just kind of openly say, yeah, this is what's happening and you can expect it at this time or that time. And more often than not, they're really happy to have that openness and that response. And so I like the word that you use, vulnerability, and I think that it's been important and valuable.
Very cool, very cool. Now, you also mentioned outcomes. So can you give us some examples of that, or maybe even tell us another story where how outcomes have molded how people have approached the social tools or approached the collaboration together?
I think that we have really tried to encourage people as they consider how to drive adoption to begin with outcomes in mind. And a lot of times, and this is something interesting for me as a storyteller, as much as we try to bring the human element, the engaging element, the fun narration into the picture, in the business world, there are also often key messages or strategic messages that have to be included. So I'll answer this through another story. There's one team inside IBM who's working to develop very complex solutions that involve multiple products and platforms. So their goal, as they began working socially and trying to get more collaborative, was to bring new deals into the pipeline and drive revenue. So that is one of those messages that resonates heavily, is a bottom line revenue for the company. So they saw that maybe they weren't being entirely efficient. Maybe they had people working with each other from across the world and needed things to move faster. So they sort of used a social blueprint of how to adopt connections in this way, how to drive efficiency using the channel. And when all was said and done, or at least they were well into this initiative, they saw that they had brought over 40 new deals into the pipeline, and that they represented over 1 million in revenue, which is exciting. And then on top of that, they also found that they reduced the solution development time by about 50%.
Wow.
So they saw just things accelerate across the board. And so that's an example of beginning with the outcome in mind, and also an example of when telling that story and when telling stories from a business perspective, those are the kinds of bottom line hits that might encourage people to take action or change a habit.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Which kind of gets into the next thing, right? The enablement. The enablement piece of it. And so some of the storytelling helps, and the how-tos. So that's, is that more like a use case kind of thing where you're creating the ideas so people get that, or how does
We have, yeah, we've tried a few different approaches. We developed an internal campaign, which we called Social Clicks. So double meaning there. And this was developed last year in 2014, kicked off in January of this year, and it was theme-based. So every month or so to 6 weeks, something like that, we provided a new set of education to IBMers. And this was meant to sort of guide them through the process. We began with very foundational pieces of how to sort of start thinking more socially, establish a digital presence, and start thinking about eminence and what it might mean to be known for your expertise. So, and what's in it for the individual, for the IBMer? And often the answer is career progression. Someone, if your skills are more visible, and you make your knowledge known by kind of sharing it freely, then people are more likely to find you and offer you sort of an interesting project or next step, something like that, or something cool to be involved in. It's, I think, instead sort of an older, or people used to think of like a need to hold their knowledge more closely to them. And now it's become more and more valuable to share that knowledge widely, and you're kind of known by what you're able to share.
Exactly. Now, are you also finding that people are feeling just generally more engaged because it feels like, hey, I can contribute something, I can make a difference here?
I think so, yeah. And it's been interesting because we've seen, as top executives at IBM use social channels, they get a lot of engagement from IBMers, and some of it is, just sort of cheering the executives on, which is fine, but some of it is more high value. And interestingly, you get people speaking out when they don't agree with something, whereas in years past, they might have been hesitant to do that in response to the top levels of the organization.
So say more about that. Because I think that there's I was reading a book, and I can't remember exactly what he called it, but some kind of an executive bubble that people, when you get to a certain level in an organization, people are less likely to be straightforward with you and tell you when they disagree with something. And as a leader, that's what you need to hear, things that you don't necessarily want to hear, but that you need that additional perspective. So can you talk a little more about that, how that plays out?
Yeah, I think that you're exactly right about that. It's something that I think we still see happen, but it's been interesting to see, even blog posts from our CEO and employees feeling comfortable posting, negative sentiment of some kind. Maybe they're frustrated with this or that project, and they feel empowered to express themselves. And in sort of a command and control environment that was probably common in the corporation in years past, here we have people raising those opinions, and then it's up to the appropriate people to sort of take action and engage those people further, and let them know that their voices have been heard and are valued. And so it's been pretty cool to see.
Well, I would guess because you haven't been with IBM as long as a lot of folks have been at IBM, so you have come in this new era as opposed to people that may have been around when it was more command and control and less social. So have you seen pockets of people just resisting, or maybe hesitating, or not quite sure if IBM really means it, or and how does that work as people are trying to evolve a culture, really? When you said it's such a huge organization.
Yeah, I think that that definitely exists because, as we said earlier, old habits die hard, and it's hard to get people to change behavior. That's why the adoption portion of my work has been so interesting, because it's about trying to get humans to change course. I think one really important thing, again, is the leadership. People who have leaders who are comfortable with a more flattened organization, putting things out in the open, are more comfortable responding and adopting those behaviors for themselves. I know you mentioned that you've read Ed's book, and I know that you know him through Twitter and everything. But he's a great example of a social leader on this verse deployment. He's an IBM VP who's in the trenches answering questions in our forums, talking to IBMers about, their first impressions of the product or what their experience was like as they moved to the cloud. And it's been great for all of us to sort of see that kind of engagement, and we can follow suit. And I think that our users who are receiving this product and being encouraged to work socially also appreciate that and kind of see that he can walk the talk, so to speak.
Yeah, I was very impressed with his ability to put it out there, and a lot of leaders are resistant to using the word again, vulnerable, are resistant to being vulnerable. But that transparency, that openness, I think, is something we crave. It's a human thing, to see that. So as you're thinking about maybe some of the things you've seen internally within IBM or with some of your clients, have there been some things that you've noticed when somebody's early in the adoption versus when it's matured a bit, and you're seeing different things happen or different results coming about that maybe weren't even expected? Or do you have any thoughts or words of wisdom on that?
I think that sometimes with social, it can be so hard to measure those quantitative results that sometimes there's a little bit on the spectrum of adoption of patience that's required as you kind of wait for those things to surface or find something that you actually can identify. So it's important just to look for other small wins or benefits, the peripheral things that I think you're referencing. And I think it goes back to those 5 categories that we've recognized: innovation, employee engagement, client experience, speed and agility, and efficiency. And those are benefits that we've identified for the company. I think there are also benefits that we've identified on a more individual level, which are kind of related to workflow, that individual eminence and career progression. And then another thing that I think, especially in a globally distributed, massive company like IBM, is important is a sense of belonging. So it's kind of cool. I mean, just this morning, I got an invitation to join a community called Meet Blues. And it's all about, when you travel around the world, hey, you've got IBMers that in India. So why not ask them for recommendations? Why not meet up with them and have some new friends to show you around? And I thought that was really fun. And people are encouraged to share their vacation photos. And it's like, hey, that's okay, because it's not like whoever's working in this community is taking too much time away from their day job. Most likely, it's more like, hey, this is employee engagement. This is people finding that sense of belonging with people on the other side of the world. And so I love seeing stuff like that. And I was thinking, hey, I'm traveling in December, who could I find to tell me where to stay or where to eat?
Exactly. Very good. Now, so are you finding that it sounds like you are, that some of the social tools are spilling over into the real world, into old school kind of forums?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of our work on connections, I would say the vast majority is all related to business objectives and our roles at the company. But there are those communities that take a little bit more of a personal nature, which are cool to see, and I think can be really useful, when used appropriately. And another thing that sort of relates to engagement is, we've got so many IBMers working on so many different projects, so many different products. It's cool to find unity in some other things that aren't necessarily personal in nature, but I've done some work with our worldwide engagement team, which I've loved because it's really based strongly in those values and practices that I mentioned. And I had always sort of loved the idea of a values-driven company. I didn't expect to find it at such a huge company, but it's been cool because IBMers can all unite around the idea of these values that apply to everything we do that sort of relates to our goals, and then usually apply to real life as well, because they're very kind of human-driven values. And then we also try to unite IBMers behind individual growth and learning. We've got an education platform inside the company that everyone's invited to use to learn about projects outside your own that you might know nothing about. And so it's been cool to see that, and the role that social can play in helping those things come to light.
Very cool. Very cool. I think that, especially with a large company, and I've worked with large organizations too, it is really hard to know what else is going on, what's the bigger picture, or even what's the smaller picture. What are those people across the hall doing? That kind of thing.
Right.
Very cool. Very cool. So what have you, and maybe I've already asked this question, but so beyond some of these initial goals, have there been some other benefits that you've noticed, or in collecting the stories that have come out that weren't part of maybe that initial objective, but have benefited the organization or your clients in some way?
Yeah, I think a lot of those do relate to the engagement and sense of belonging piece. And then again, that innovation being able to rise to the surface and solve problems. Maybe there are problems that have been sort of floating around and no one really knows what to do with them. But when you start working transparently and collaboratively and just putting things out in the open, you encounter someone who has an answer or a piece of the answer, or knows someone who can lead you closer to the answer, that kind of thing. So
Excellent.
Often there are those rabbit trails that end up being very valuable.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. That's funny. I interviewed somebody last week and he said something very, very similar.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, very cool. Okay. Well, I thank you so much, Lauren, for your time and for sharing some of your stories and the experiences that you've seen there. And I wish you much luck and good fortune and more storytelling in the future.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure.
Take care. This podcast was brought to you by Bigger Brains, online training that won't bore you to tears. Expand the minds of your workforce at getbiggerbrains.com. During our interview, we mentioned Ed Brill's book, Opting In. And while it's written from the perspective of a product manager, there's information in this book that applies to anybody in business today, regardless of your role. Thanks for tuning in to Permission to Speak. If you want to increase collaboration and innovation in your organization, check out more resources available at speakingpractically.com or give me a call, Kelly Vandever, at 770-597-1108.